Has there ever been a country that is kicked more than Israel? Ever a country that is more condemned, more demonized, more boycotted than Israel? Do you want me to join in and kick Israel while it's down, while it's being kicked by half of the world? Maybe I will. If you can convince me that kicking Israel while it's down and joining the feeding frenzy will be good for the peace process. Let's assume that it's still right to push for peace right now. The very last thing you want to do is malign the settlement. Every time you malign a Jewish settlement, you reinforce the false narrative that this is stolen land. Israel concessions have absolutely no value because on the other side, the narrative is that we stole the land. And if you steal the land, all you got to do is give it back. If Peter Beinart really wanted to help the peace process, he would help Israel make a legitimate claim for its rights in Judea and Samaria. The actual population of Jewish settlers is 0.99% of the West Bank, less than 1%. Now, of course, Israel controls 42% of the West Bank, which includes roads and infrastructure and sewers and bases and so forth, right? But we learned something from the evacuation of Gaza. We learned that it's a lot easier to evacuate sewers than it is to evacuate families. And families in the West Bank are in less than 1% of the West Bank. And then we talk about, well, settlement growth and the settlement growth, you know. Now, take a guess. How many new settlements have been built? I'm not talking about illegal outposts because I'm agreeing with Peter on illegal outposts. I will never defend anything that's illegal. But how many new settlements? In the last 14 years, how many new settlements? Just take a wild guess. Zero. You're right. Zero. After Israel had done a 10-month moratorium on building in Judea and Samaria, a moratorium that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton called unprecedented. This is what George Mitchell said. The Palestinians opposed it on the grounds, in their words, that it was worse than useless. So they refused to enter into the negotiations until 9 months of the 10 had elapsed. Once they entered, they then said it was indispensable. What had been worse than useless a few months before then became indispensable, and they said they would not remain in the talks until that indispensable element were extended. That's our peace partners. And that's where the peace process has been hiding for the past couple of years, paralyzed by a Palestinian demand that they themselves consider worse than useless. And despite all of that, Peter Beinart thinks that the way forward is for Jews to stop building bathrooms and bedrooms in Efrat. This is not just an idea that hasn't worked. It's not just an idea that I consider misguided and counterproductive. It's also an approach that's insulting to the Palestinians. When you don't hold people accountable, you insult them by treating them like children. When Mahmoud Abbas denies any Jewish connection to Jerusalem, you treat him like a child by letting him off the hook. When he glorifies terrorists and allows the teaching of Jew hatred in his schools and summer camps, you insult him by not holding him accountable. Now, of course, Peter knows that Arabs in Israel have more rights, freedoms, and economic opportunities than any Arabs in the Middle East. He knows that Israel is teeming with social activism and with the fight for social justice. He knows that 200,000 kids from Gaza and West Bank were treated in Israeli hospitals over the past couple of years. He knows that what makes a great democracy is not whether or not it makes mistakes, but whether it has a corrective mechanism to handle those mistakes. And there are few countries that have a louder, noisier, healthier, more vigorous corrective mechanism than Israel. He knows all that. But he still says you're a democracy in crisis. Because when Peter quotes the Declaration of Independence, he forgets to quote a key line. And that line is, we will be a nation that loves peace, but also knows how to defend itself. Israel makes an enormous amount of mistakes. But I've been there 50 times over the years, and I will tell you this. Behind every mistake is a corrective mechanism in action. And it's that corrective mechanism where democracy lives. Peter's made a big deal about the liberal Jews in America, about the new generation of liberal Jews who are not as connected to Israel. And it pains him. And this new generation, many of them, have been informed about Israel, their image about Israel, from what they've seen, when they've seen on campus. Israel being called baby killers, being called apartheid, boycott campaigns. They see in the news that Israel is continuously condemned. That is what has nourished them, the poison that has been unleashed on Israel. So his big idea is to pile on the criticism about the settlements. And I love Peter when I say this, but how can that work? How can you take someone who's already poisoned and make things worse and hope that it's going to make things better? How can you do that? But you know what's funny about all this is that if you read his famous article from the New England Review, from the New York Review of Books 2 years ago, in the very beginning of the article, he has himself, he writes the solution. He writes the better way. He quotes these focus groups that Frank Luntz did. And the focus groups were exactly this group of disconnected young liberal Jews. He quotes the groups and he said, you know, Frank Luntz, he showed him several ads, and there was one in particular. And Peter quotes only one headline in the article. There was only one. That was one of the most popular ads. That's the one he quotes. Take a guess what the ad was. It's 5 words. The ad that was the most popular was proof that Israel wants peace. That was the ad. Now, that's not criticism. That's not propaganda. That's context. So what did Peter do? Did he run with this big idea? Well, not really. He wrote a book that essentially says proof that Israel doesn't want peace. He couldn't even follow his own advice. Israel has been saying for 2 years, we're ready to speak now with no conditions. How much more clear can it be? How much more clear can it be? In the meantime, until peace arrives, we should not sit and be paralyzed. We have a great message for the world. That Israel has gotten lessons for the past 64 years that are precisely what the Arab Spring craves. What are they asking for? We should show the world that we care not just about Palestinians, but we care about 400 million Arabs. And we have a know-how that can help those 400 million Arabs. Israel needs to be seen as a place, as a resource to help the world and to help the Middle East, not just as a failed state that can't reach peace. Israel is the one that can make a difference. But instead of that, we're faced with this idea of Israel as a failed democracy, a democracy in crisis that needs to stop its settlement growth. What's the best way to love Israel? So now we have 2 options. Do we want 100,000 Jews going down Pico Boulevard bashing Israel over the settlements? Or do we want 100,000 Jews going down Pico Boulevard saying that Israel is the cure to the Middle East and not the curse? Which option do we want?